Hi, my name's Mark Harrington and I'm from the JRS International Office, and I'm very happy to welcome you here to the inaugural JRS Leadership Workshop here in the Korat Centre in a suburb called Karen in Nairobi, Kenya, where we have 20 country directors from JRS who've gathered here to begin or continue their leadership journeys. And I would now like to hand you over to Peter Belais, who is the International Director of JRS, to give you a few introductory words. Thanks. Bye.
Welcome to our international training workshop for country directors in the Jesuit Refugee Service. We try this time an approach of competency-based training to look at the competences which are needed in an international organization which works in over 50 countries in different cultural settings and always in conflict situations, mostly in conflict situations in countries like Syria, Afghanistan, Congo, the Central African Republic. We are an organization which is faith-based, an organization of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit Refugee Service, and we are not there as a for-profit. We are a non-profitable organization, and that means as an organization we are driven by our motivation, by inspiration. Why we do that? We want to serve refugees, we want to accompany them, and we want to advocate their cause. That is our inspiration, and that is key for any leader in JRS to be inspired and to inspire the teams. And to work with teams is very important. So these skills, working with the teams is crucial for any leadership in this organization, where people who are in difficult situations need to be accompanied, inspired, and also encouraged and guided in their work. So teamwork is important, a very important competency. Of course, communication, fast communication, decision making. We need to make decisions in difficult situations, sometimes fast because one has to react. But of course, we do not just react to situations, we think about, analyze about the future, where do we want to go as an organization. This is also an issue why we want to invest more in our leaders, country directors and regional directors. We have around 50 country directors and 10 regional directors, so these are the core people who carry the organization ahead. Over the last years we can see there's a tendency to grow. We are in more projects involved, the sizes of projects grow. Obviously, we do the work well, so there's more demand on JRS to get involved, demand or request by the UNHCR to get involved and so on. But in order to shoulder all this more work, we need to train our people, to have the capacity and the competence to do that. And that's why we invest in this training in our key people, the country directors, and later in the year the regional directors, to be competent leaders in JRS.
I'm very excited about this week's training. For me, most of my management skills and style have come just through fieldwork and experience. So I think this is a great opportunity to formalize some of what we learn in the field and to really enhance our skills.
En la región América Latina Caribe.
From the Latin American Caribbean region, I crossed the world to come to this training. Really, I came very motivated and with a lot of interest to reflect on our role as managers and leaders in JRS, to learn new tools, new behaviors, and how to accompany our teams to do better their daily work with the displaced and refugees. Mainly, I had a lot of interest in sharing experiences with people from other regions, from all over the world, who are working with the same objectives, ideas, similar principles. Even though we have come from different contexts, I am with lots of motivations to build, to contribute in order to change in one way or another the situation of the people we accompany, who at the end are our main objective.
Y bueno, con muchas ganas de construir y de aportar desde nuestros roles a que se cambie de alguna manera la situación de las personas que acompañamos, que son finalmente nuestro principal objetivo.
My hope for the conference here in Nairobi was to really, a couple things. One, to get some specific skills in improving our HR practice in Jordan. Also to think a little bit about programmatic structure. I hope to learn that just from conversations with other people in different parts of the world who are running similar programs, but of course in different contexts. Also, I think just general management skills.
What expectation I have for this workshop on leadership competence in JRS is, I suppose, a realization that JRS as an organization has always been a responsive organization. So we respond to emergencies, to needs, to situations where people flee from their homes because of fear of persecution. And as a responsive organization, we also need to respond to the complexity of refugee situations in the world. Part of that response is learning from our achievements as well as our mistakes, and therefore the aim of this workshop to increase our competence in terms of leadership is yet just another part of that response mechanism, so to speak, so that we take on board data, experience to learn from one another, learn from experts in the field, but also learn perhaps principally from the wisdom and the skills that collectively as an organization we have built up over the years.
One of the expectations I have is derived from the very theme of this workshop. I do believe that organizations are as best as their leaders are. And so gathering all the leaders, country directors mainly from JRS, throughout the organization, we gather to share first and foremost our experiences of leadership, but also to hone the skills that we have, to shape them, to deepen them, so that we can professionalize what we are already doing. Leadership is such a great tool where through inspirations, motivations, self-awareness, and networking with our stakeholders, we bring lots of skills, lots of values, and move organizations from one step to the next. So my hope is that this will be a time for all JRS leaders gathered here in Nairobi to be able to share what they have as leaders, but to get skills that move their leadership skills to the next level. And my other hope is that at the end of this workshop, we then become trainers of those other leaders, project directors, and everybody else, because as far as I believe and know, each one of us in the organization is a leader. So to be able to cascade what we get from this week to the field level, so that together we move so competently and confidently as an organization for the better service of our forcibly displaced brothers and sisters.
Ken and I spent some time having a look at the objectives that you guys have set for the week. For us, they fell into 4 clear categories. So we had an awful lot of people saying they wanted to essentially learn some tools they can take away back to their areas of the world with regards to leadership. Obviously, the main reason we're here this week. There were also some more specific areas we wanted to cover to perhaps pick up on some issues you may currently be facing with your own teams. There was an overwhelming desire as well for us to be talking as a group, for us to get to know what each other are doing in our respective countries. Perhaps some more specific things with regards to HR and finance that you want some clarity on.
So let's move into the first of the 4 modules that we're going to have. At the end of this module, which lasts about a day, we will have covered these points. We're going to reflect on the traits of what makes up a good leader and have a common and consistent understanding across all of us of what that is. We're going to reflect on some different styles of leadership, because there are clearly many different styles. We're going to, in looking at some of the feedback from your online survey, reflect on our own leadership style. And then we're going to look at when or why or how would I need to flex my leadership style for different circumstances, different situations, different people. We're going to look at what makes a motivational environment. So clearly, if you've got staff who come to work with a skip in their walk, you're going to achieve better results. So how do we achieve that? And finally, we're just going to touch briefly on the power of storytelling in delivering a message, and how PowerPoint presentations are great, but stories are what people remember. Ken, could I ask you just to share with us the linkage between motivating and self-awareness as a topic, as a behaviour, and our values?
We could just go back for a few minutes to the whole notion of values, which obviously you could say, why are there 7 values of JRS and not 14? Peter addressed this somewhat this morning when he was talking about the strategic framework, and the answer is there is an arbitrariness to this, no doubt. What we've tried to do is we've tried to, in all our discussions, hone down the number of values or the descriptions of values to 7 values that we thought were tremendously important in JRS. Now, those values have deep human resonance to them, there's no question about it. And they also have deep religious resonance in many different traditions, not just simply the Christian or the Catholic tradition. But so what we're trying to say is these are deep human values that are part and parcel of what we do. We think that good leaders in JRS will not only recognize this and say, ah, yeah, this is compassion, and move on, but they'll basically be trying to say, okay, what am I trying to do with my teams? How am I trying to say, how does the value, when we're talking about motivating and influencing others and self-awareness, how do some of the values tap into what we're trying to accomplish? What we're trying to do by this little logo up here is basically say that values are the roots of what we're trying to accomplish. On top of the tree, of course, there are the branches and the leaves and the fruit. That's the work and the outcomes. That's all that we do, working with refugees and trying to make their lives better in some fashion or another. But the roots, the thing that drives us, that makes us who we are the values underneath. And so what we're trying to say here is that compassion, solidarity, and hope in some way play a role in motivating and influencing others, and also in our own self-awareness. And I'd like to suggest that in terms of compassion, what I'd like to simply focus on this afternoon is that compassion is a virtue, is a value that allows us to keep our eyes open. Not only just keep them open so we see, but that we see deeply, that we're able to basically see, what is it in the other person that makes that person another self like me? But it's not just seeing in the eyes of another person the image of God, it is that. But it's also stepping into the vulnerability of that person, stepping into the weakness of that person. We do this so often when we work in accompaniment with refugees. Of course, that's true. But we can also do that in dealing with our own staff as well. In terms of solidarity, the phrase that I like to use is standing with someone, standing by their side. That's, I think, what we try to do in our work with refugees, and I think it's what we also try to do with our work with our staff as well. That we don't let people simply stand alone. That's a plight that many refugees experience in so many different ways, that they're basically all alone. But it's something that's in each one of us as well, that frequently we can feel alone and isolated. And what that virtue, that value calls us to do is to stand with someone so that they do not feel alone. And finally, I think the value of hope. Our third strategic goal is, talks about, where are we? Talks about kindling hope through learning. And we've all experienced, and several of you talked about this morning, that we've experienced kids and younger adults who basically feel that they have no future. They've been in a camp for a good 17 out of their 20 years of life. They see no real change to that coming along, and they find themselves incredibly isolated and alone. And that can also stand the risk of people going into a downward spiral and into depression, and we've often seen that. And what hope is letting them become aware that there is a person, that there are people in their lives who can actually help, who can actually take hold of them and help them move forward. And I think we've seen that in so many of our educational programs. How do we integrate this into our own deepest values? Let's take a look at what a good leader looks like. What we'll be asking ourselves is, who has inspired you as a leader? What have been the aspects, the strengths that they've had that really touch your life in some way, so that touch your heart, that kind of say, yeah, this is why this person has been a great leader for me? And how have they made in some way an impact on you? Okay? So I want you to take just a few minutes, okay, and think about those three questions and see if you can start to come up with some person and try to answer those questions with respect to that person.
My answer to this question stems from 8 years ago when I became aware of the need to develop my leadership skills. And it was on a training course, much like this. And the man who was doing what I'm doing was a guy called Noel Tichy. He worked for a man who you would have heard of called Jack Welch. So Jack Welch is regarded probably as the greatest business leader of the 20th century. He formed General Electric into the world's largest conglomerate and very successful company. If you look at the Fortune 500, you'll find that 20 to 25% of the CEOs come from General Electric. And so that tells us that General Electric does something pretty damn good to develop leaders. And Welch turned to Tichy and said, I want to invest in our leadership training. I want to invest in our people. Now, the revelation to me was that I always thought, naively in hindsight, that successful companies made really good, the reason they were successful is because they made fundamentally good strategic decisions. And I looked at the world through strategic decisions, like our strategic framework, which I think is great. But I was wrong. What makes good, great companies is great leaders. The best teams win the matches. And that analogy, I think, applies to JRS. And that was my revelation, was that companies are successful not through good strategic decisions. That's an outcome. Why they took the good strategic decisions was because they had great leaders. And that, for me, that was an epiphany moment, because I'd spent 25 years of the rest of my working career thinking something completely different. So, for me, in answer to the question, who has inspired you as a leader, it's Jack Welch and what he did with General Electric. Mario, you might have a different perspective on the world.
I've worked with quite a number of people whom I consider great leaders. Fortunately, since I was a very junior officer, due to the functions that I performed, I always worked very close to directors. So I used to work very close to what I call the center of gravity, where I was very much involved in the decision-making, or at least I was a witness to decision-making. There are two people in particular that have really inspired me. One, unfortunately, is no longer with us. Both of them were directors. One was somebody I worked with in Turkey. I should say that he was, for me, an inspiration. The only time that this man raised his voice at me was the time that I mentioned the word abortion. But this was a man who had a vision. He came to Turkey. He had a vision for what we should be doing, how our relations should be with the government. He was very, very humble the way he communicated his vision. He was very clear in communicating the vision. And he could communicate it in a way that everybody in the office could understand the vision. He was instrumental in backing up his staff. His staff were sacrosanct for him. If anybody made a mistake, he will never whip you in public. He will defend you. He will then call you to his office. And I think that was something very, very appreciative. The other man, who unfortunately is no longer with us, was the director I worked with. Again, the same type of personality. Calm, which is very important. Could communicate the message in a very clear. Every time you went to him with a problem, you knew you would have an answer. Might not have been the answer that you wanted, but he had an answer. And there was something he did that really, really touched me. My mother had a stroke. She was in the hospital. She came out of the hospital, and I went up to him, and I said, Jack, his name was Jack Moucher, God have him in a good place. I said, Jack, if you do not mind, I would like to take a week off to go to the United States to see my mother, who just came out of the hospital. Is that okay with you? And he looked up at me, I'll never forget his words. Mario, don't you think you're old enough to know your priorities? That really touched me. Because if you cannot have the trust of your staff, you're not a leader. I've worked with people in 27 years who were the most competent people. I can throw your names at you by the dozen. I would never want to work under them. They were my colleagues. It's being able to communicate. It's being able to build trust with people. To have a vision, communicate that vision, to have people believe in your vision.
What I'd like to do now is I'd just like to open the floor. Who's able now to give us their sense of who a good leader has been, what are the aspects of that good leader, what has motivated you through that person?
When I have a leadership crisis and I'm getting fed up, a bit or tired or spiritually tired, I like to meditate St. Peter. He was a leader in the church. What he was, the role, how is he presented in the gospel with strengths and weakness, you know. Very interesting, but more closer to the work here, I would recall really Mark Graper was for me. From him I learned the refugee work. I was a totally unexperienced GRS worker. He had to listen to a lot of things. Also at the beginning, the difficulties I had, you know, in teams. But he was always patient and understanding is so wider. And And learning from his charismatic, inspiring leadership style, that's how we grew. I valued a lot that he visited the fields, was with the teams, he accompanied the teams. And that's one of the quite a number of things I learned. JRS has grown 13 years down the line now when he handed over as international director, and other complementary skills and all needed, and JRS has grown also beyond pioneering charismatic leadership style, but for the beginning it was very important, and to keep some of the elements of that charismatic, inspiring leadership style, compassionate with the teams and so on. I would like to wish that we can carry some of this forward.
Cuando yo fui voluntaria,
when I was working as a volunteer in the first year in JRS, the national director in Colombia, Jorge Serrano, was a chap who had a very strong character.
un líder que representó una gran aprendizaje.
Who represented, who caused me great learning was Jorge Serrano, the national director of JRS in Colombia when I was a volunteer. On the first year when I joined, I was very young, and I think that I learned a lot from his leadership for several reasons. He was a man with strength of character. He had also some closeness and to people and sympathy, and he could attract people, and people could approach him and would like him. And I think that is very relevant to generate closeness with the people with whom one works. Another element important, I think, is creativity. He was a very creative person. He could generate ideas all the time on how to do the work that we do with people, what kind of strategies we should generate. He had a great capacity of quick response to moments of crisis in Colombia when there were lots of wars and massive displacements of people. He would take decisions under pressure with great ease, and that surprised me. And he was always very calm. And I think also that something very valuable, which I learned from him, was that he had a deep knowledge of the context of the situations. He taught us also to analyze and to learn to read into the circumstances, to read between the lines on what was happening in our own conflict in order to be able to get answers within the situation. And we are therefore always constantly analyzing situations, learning how to read from the context what was going on.
Mahatma Gandhi is the inspiring leader even today for me and number of persons. And there are lots of characters, qualities we can attribute to this great man. But some of the qualities which are very much inspiring even now, when I am in a trouble or crisis, I follow his examples. The first quality is his compassion to people at the lowest level. So from this ground reality, you can develop the program, policies, and whatever you want to build for the nation. And second one is patience. When the country was about to be partitioned between Pakistan and India, and he was the man who went on a pilgrimage to different places, asking people to be united, not to going for bloodshed, enmity, but instead remain patient, grow in human values and virtues. That should be the value for human growth, not based on enmity and other negative feelings.
Quizás sea muy ambicioso, pero I may be too ambitious, but for me, the leadership model is Jesus of Nazareth. Any human being that becomes more like Jesus, depending on his own natural conditions, the closer we go to the norm, which is Christ, this person can be a good leader.
De ese líder tipo, Jesús, ahí está.
This
la
leader,
fuerza,
Jesus,
fuerza
here we find
en el amor,
the strength in love, in liberty.
Lo que me ha impactado en él.
What made an impact on me from him is the strength, the follow-up and the service. Gandhi, Teresa of Calcutta, just to talk of leaders in the near history are great leaders. In my life I have seen people, among simple people, who have become light for people without hope, and they become hope. People who bring about warmth in the hearts of other people who are in need, and these are the people who move us. They are great leaders. The leader, however, is Jesus.
Quien se asemeje a esa forma de ser, de acuerdo a sus capacidades.
The more Jesus-like we are, the better leaders we are.
Thanks all very much. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to move to a video. Ask you to just spend some time watching this video, and then we're going to reflect on leadership, having seen this video of Martin Luther King. Okay?
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. And when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
So we've just heard the words of one of the great American leaders of the last century, and probably we've heard one of the greatest speeches of the last century as well. It's hard to listen to it and not be shaken and moved. But what we'd like to do now is we'd like to just have you reflect on that. And we'd like to, in terms of leadership, we'd like you to ask yourselves, what image, what set of words captured you and touched you? Why is this speech such a great speech of leadership? What did he say? What are the images that he used, the words he used that capture that sense of leadership? So what is it that you're hearing that says, this man was a great leader?
Great orator.
Hope in their own people. Conviction in their speech.
Content of character.
Stand up for freedom.
Great passion with compassion.
His use of imagery. So often he talked of little boys and little girls, and you got the image in your mind. So often he talked of freedom being sounded out from the top of a mountain, and you got that image in your mind. And the use of imagery, for me, is one of the most powerful elements of leadership that he displays in delivering that speech. Because you just had millions of images in your mind, because he gave you the language to paint those images.
The fact that he repeats several times, I have a dream, and then he spells out that dream, so therefore he's sharing his vision, and he unfolds that vision with every time he's repeating, I have a dream.
A great orator, the way he was able to voice out his vision to the people. I mean, somebody mentioned convincing, but I think it's more than conviction. He had passion and conviction together to bring it out alive.
He could easily have turned it into a speech sort of attacking the other side, so to speak, but he doesn't do that. It's a rhetoric of bringing sides together. So, he's addressing enemy and friend as essentially as, the same audience, as potentially one audience. And so that language of unity, I think, is very powerful. It sets it apart from a lot of the other speeches on the same theme.
Despite a situation of immense difficulty and suffering that he's lived with in the present, he has this unwavering hope for this vision of the future. And so the line that stuck out most to me is when he says, we can suffer, we can go to jail, knowing that freedom is at the end of the road. And I think just that continuous, to be in a situation that's not easy and not hard, but somehow to have, no matter what, have a vision that hope and freedom is possible. Thank you.
Though it is his individual dream, it is connected with a team of black and white Jews, and he's narrating all these things, children.
It becomes
Fast.
universal.
Yeah, universal.
His speech also advocates for coexistence among different races. Without coexistence, there will be no peace, no unity, and no prosperity, especially for the United States of America in that time.
Mm-hmm. I think he is not a friend to sign dreams and sign ideas. He's not a friend for the situation.
Not in this speech, but in the speech that he gives the day before he dies, he actually says the words it doesn't matter to me anymore because I've been to the mountaintop. And it's I always just think of Ignatius' ideal of not being attached to anything, but to being attached to that longer term vision and being without fear, no matter what happens, whether I get killed tomorrow, which is actually what happened to MLK.
Let's look at the bottom of the screen here and look at this quote from Henry Ford from the early 20th century. Vision without execution equals hallucination. I think what Ford is trying to say in a funny kind of way is simply that, it's a pretty story is not enough. Just a speech that is robust in imagery, but it's just a pretty speech is not enough unless you can execute your dream or begin to execute your dream. Step on the step on the bus in Selma, or continue the boycotts. Go to jail in Montgomery. Unless you continue to do that, then your dream is just a dream. But it's executing the dream and moving the dream forward and helping others to move that dream forward is what makes, in some ways, a great leader of Martin Luther King, Jr.
These quotes are from research from a European Organisational Leadership Council, and they surveyed hundreds of companies across Europe to say, what are the hallmarks for you of great leaders? And these are the 5 that came out on the top, and I'll just go through them quickly because I think in many ways we've touched on them already. Someone who can engage and inspire. I mean, Luther King did that in spades. Creative and innovative, that's a great aspect of leadership. Being able to think outside of the box, have the courage to think outside of the box. Being able to deliver and sustain change. So to Ken's earlier point, exempling Martin Luther King, who was on the bus in Selma organising the rallies. You've got to be down there with the troops and making change happen and continuing to make change happen. It's able to articulate the vision. So it's great to engage and inspire, but you've got to have the words to paint that vision so that people want to follow you. And then finally, the way you deliver that vision and engage the people. So your communication skills, how you reach out to people, how you assess what your audience is and adjust your message to the audience. Let's spend a little bit of time, now that we've looked at leaders and what are some characteristics of them, at leadership styles. Motivate, delegate, instruct, and educate. If we start off with the instruct, so instruct or direct. So that's the kind of situation where you're articulating as a leader, you're articulating a lot of detail, you are kind of standing over, if you like, the people who you are leading, and you're being very directive. So that's a style of leadership, and there are situations where that can play. We might adopt more of an educational or enabling approach, where we give a lot of personal support, and we explain why. So why are we making this cup of coffee? Well, actually, it's the beginning of the day, and people's bodies aren't working properly, and they need some drugs, and coffee's a very good drug, and it makes you feel better afterwards, and this is how you go about doing it. And you're a bit more to engage the people, and then they go away and undertake the task. So a different style. Again, for a different audience, for a different situation. You might be in a situation where you want to be more of a motivational leader. So there what you're looking to do is get the people interested in making the cup of coffee. They're a bit disinterested for whatever reason. Maybe they're tea drinkers. And you're trying to convince them that actually making a cup of coffee is great and it's got some real benefits in it for them. You're experiencing a different culture when you drink Italian coffee, yada, yada, yada. So you are needing to engage the people. They know how to make a cup of coffee, but you need to engage them, and you need to develop and deploy a motivational style of leadership. And then finally, there's the delegate style, okay? So there, you've got people who are quite interested in making a cup of coffee. You've got people who know how to make a cup of coffee, and you're just saying, look, we've got 25 people who are yawning because it's mid-afternoon and we need to make them a cup of Italian coffee. Great, just go off and do it. And you don't need to stand over them, and they'll go off and do it. And you might provide a bit more. But so you can see there's different style. You're still talking about making a cup of coffee, but you're doing it in different ways to meet the audience or the activity. It's a simple example, but I use that same example to illustrate 4 different styles. We will feel more comfortable with a particular style of leadership. So I would like us to stand up and to go to whichever style of leadership you feel most comfortable with, and then have a discussion.
Motivador nos atrae más, nos sentimos más identificados por...
We think that the motivating style attracts us more. We feel more identified with it for several reasons. On the one hand, it allows us to strengthen the abilities of each person within the team, and that also generates the creation of capacity to take initiative, to be creative, and that each person in his own role may take decisions with responsibility. We think that the motivating spirit allows us to get the best out of the teamwork. It allows us to have strategies to look after the persons, to look after one another, and each one for himself. And if the leader is motivating, the team will have a greater capacity to understand the rules, the procedures, the instructions, and even the reasons for these instructions, and they are going to fulfill them with conviction. And besides, there'll be a great openness to learning. And we also said that when there's a motivated team, it's a winning team, it's a happy team, it's a team that enjoys what it's doing.
Lo que hace. Y también pues que ciertamente es más sencillo.
And also, certainly, it's easier to achieve the objectives when the team is motivated, when the leader is constantly encouraging this motivation, and also it becomes easier to make a positive criticism in order to achieve transformation of what has to be changed.
Motivation or motivated people have a lot of room for creativity and autonomy, which really gives best results. And also motivated people, they really go beyond their limits, and then they are ready for any extra work or any extra strength to put in. And when you're into the argument, when you buy into the argument, and you develop a sort of trust, and which really helps the team to be really happy, and then put a lot of efforts to reach the goal. And it's also open for feedback, so that it can be very constructive. The leadership style that we were least interested, or we felt that that didn't suit us, or least suit us. First one was instructive, where people felt that there's no freedom and there's no creativity, and it's like you wait for the command and then you do it. So you are told to. And of course, the other one people chose is delegate, where people felt that a lot of trust is entrusted and a lot of trust is put there. So with which people really put a lot of efforts.
Ken's reiterating the conversation that we began with, which was delegation's only possible if you already have people who have been educated and motivated and trained, and it can potentially be the easiest form if you have a competent staff. Then the conversation, I think, led into other directions of, if your team is, well, number one, if the team is not competent, then of course you have to go back to the other forms of either instructing or educating or motivating. There were some other things that are talked about that kind of weren't related to delegation as much, and I apologize if I didn't speak exactly what our group spoke to. But.
We were agreed that essentially, if you don't have a basic preference for education, then the other three modes aren't really going to be applicable or usable. We all agreed that education wasn't a case of as is shown in the image, of this person standing at the front of a class talking down to people sitting down at another level. But really it's one of, back to the etymology of education, a drawing out of people's capacities. And it's a drawing out not just of intellectual capacity, but also of psychological capacity, of emotional capacity, and I suppose given our context as well as JRS, of spiritual capacity. That there are all these capabilities and capacities there, and education is a kind of sharing of perhaps of information, whether it's emotional information or intellectual information, and that then allows people to draw from themselves those capacities, but also then to share their experiences, their capacity with the teacher. So it's a mutual learning, which strengthens the team, and it also gives the answer to the question that everyone's going to ask, even if you try to motivate them, which is the question why. That if you have an answer to the why question that people can take ownership of, then the rest of the process of working, carrying out the mission and so on becomes much easier, because it's then self-motivating rather than motivation coming in from the outside. We were sort of, again, unanimous in all disliking or rather not preferring instructing as a mode. And that again came about because there was a sense that instruction was a kind of last resort mode for most of us, where someone really had no clue at all what to do. And even in using that mode, it always becomes a kind of self-questioning for oneself as a leader, because if you have to instruct someone who's clueless, basically, it really means you've either employed wrongly, you've made a bad decision, or you've not educated or trained well, or you've not actually created a good team. And so it comes back to your leadership, and it comes back again to your failure, I suppose, or you're falling short of doing what should be done, which is a kind of education process. We also recognize that education requires time, which is a luxury, and that there are times where you do have to instruct, perhaps, or delegate as a first preference, usually in an emergency situation, situation of great urgency. But in saying that, we recognize that really all these four modes are complementary. They're not either-ors. And also, we recognize that essentially the modes depend, perhaps which mode you choose, a large part of that depends really on the person you're trying to lead.